That's why I say it's really important to think about what you're showing of yourself and how you're showing it, how you're presenting it. Presentation is key in this business.
Yeah.
You can do also the same with not showing your wealth. You can do your best work and present it in the wrong way, and it will just look really bad.
Welcome to the Creators House podcast. My name is Potwala Alexander, founder of Creators House. If you're looking to build a career within the creative industry, then you've come to the right place. The aim of this podcast is to see you win. Let's get into it. Welcome to today's episode. So today we have Julia Schoierer, who is a Berlin born and raised freelance photographer, event curator, brand consultant, and sneakerhead. Julia started her career within the creative industry through her passion for sneakers. She started collecting sneakers in the late 90s and since then has curated one of the most impressive sneaker collections in Europe with over 1,000 pairs to her name. Through sneakers, Julia became rooted in Berlin culture. Her passion for hip-hop and the iconic graffiti scene in Berlin inspired her to capture moments and tell authentic stories through photography. Julia's photography career started to go from strength to strength, all while still at university. Since starting her career as a freelance photographer, she has worked with the likes of, check this, Nike, Jordan, JD Sports, Vogue, Highsnobiety, Complex, Universal Music, Sony Music, Tommy Hilfiger, Beats by Dre, and the list, trust me, goes on. There's more than that. But Julia also gets inspired by working across different disciplines. She curated one of the biggest sneaker exhibitions in Germany and is regularly working as a brand consultant for brands such as Adidas, Puma, Levi's, Foot Locker, and more. I'm super excited to dive into Julia's story and understand more about the Berlin creative scene. Julia, appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much. You've got obviously an amazing CV, an amazing career that we're going to get into in a second. But I'm super excited to have you join this mentoring program because I really wanted to give like a different perspective and not just continuously tell like the London perspective. I wanted to speak to people across other cities across Europe, one to understand the similarities in the creative industry, but then also understand the differences. So we're going to get into your photography and we're going to get into all the kind of brand consultancy work and the work that you've been doing over the last few years. But before we do, I want to, start at the beginning. So you're born and raised Berlin, so you're a true Berliner. And I do believe that a lot of the time our kind of young ages or young years kind of define who we are as people. So what was it like for you growing up in Berlin?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The young ages are usually the ones that set the direction that you're aiming at in the later years. Growing up in the Berlin was absolutely great, in my opinion. I love the city. I really love how multicultural the city is. And I grew up the first 10 years in the city when it was still divided by the Iron Curtain. So the Berlin Wall was still up. And my teenage years, the wall came down, which also brought massive changes, obviously, in the city, which was also an exciting thing to be an eyewitness to.
That's crazy because us as kind of tourists, I've been to Berlin a few times and I love it. And kind of when you hear about the Berlin Wall, but when you go and actually see a physical wall, it kind of hits you differently. But that's crazy. You kind of went through that experience of living with the wall up and with the wall down. Can you just give us like a little bit of, this is just out of curiosity to be fair, a little bit of context of what it was like in those years when the wall came down?
Well, I was still a child when the wall was up, but you could definitely feel, this was a normal for me of living in a city that was divided and that I could actually just pass on the other side through checkpoints. And Berlin really was an island in that sense because all around Berlin, it was Russian territory. So the people from there were not allowed to come over to the West. And I think when the wall came down and all the changes that came with it, that really fueled my interest in heritage because you are getting confronted with so much heritage in the city. Like you mentioned, when you actually walk through the city and you see pieces of the wall still standing. And Berlin is a very heritage-rich city in the sense that we also show that we have the heritage. So when you walk around in Berlin and you look on the floor, you can actually still see the places where the wall was on the floor. They actually left cobblestone, and you can really feel like what the division was like. And when the city came together, I mean, the East Berliners were kind of living in a different world than we were. And these worlds clashing together was a very intense experience in the sense that, it was like two countries becoming one, and both sides obviously having some prejudice about the other sides, but in a sense also having this capital city pride, I would say. So that really glued us together. And I think, that was a very interesting experience also for my interdisciplinary work, because realizing that the most fruitful results can actually be found not through the straight way, but through lots of other ways that you can pursue.
Nice. I love that. And I don't know if I've made a link here. I don't know if it's an accurate link or not. But you talk about how when the wall came down, it really gave you an interest in heritage. Obviously, your sneaker collection is crazy, and you started collecting sneakers early on, and a lot of your stuff is quite vintage based as well. Like, did that create a bit of a curiosity for you to kind of start going into sneakers or not?
I think just the realization that there are different markets that really was brought to my attention through the fall of the wall, because it was obvious for me that I had access to other stuff than my East Berlin neighbors, in the sense that when my parents we visited our friends in the East, we would always bring smuggle care packages with products that they wouldn't have access to. So just that realization of scarcity of certain markets opened my eyes to a world that is just has different different identities and different ways of dealing with stuff, and that obviously sparked my curiosity where the origins of that came from and where the heritage is.
Yeah, and this is fascinating because we've done a little bit of work on this before, and that's where we met, and really kind of diving into Berlin culture. And if you can, just talk to us a little bit about the Berlin creative scene, because I find the Berlin creative scene fascinating. I love it. And I think, you kind of spoke about it already. The history of Berlin definitely shapes and creates a little bit of that. So can you talk to how the history of Berlin, i.e. the Berlin Wall and everything else that happened beforehand, kind of shapes almost like the general behavior and attitude of the creative in Berlin, like today?
I think part of Berlin identity is a little bit of a rebellious identity, because, like I said, we have been an island here in a political sense. And I think this not giving things, not giving not giving too much, not giving too much about the opinion of other people and other ideals is part of that identity, because we had to identify or find our own city identity, in a sense, over and over again. You know what I mean? Berlin was occupied by French and Russian and American and British. So we had different sectors, and all these sectors had different identities due to their once German heritage, but also through the heritage of the occupying countries. And I think this diversity can be really seen in the creative scene in Berlin, because we are a melting pot. We have so many people not only coming here, but living here with different heritages. So that really makes up the creative identity of Berlin, in a sense that there is everything and nothing, in a sense. You know what I mean? It's like I couldn't pinpoint this is typical Berlin and this is not, because in every kind of sense of way, there's different ways of living these truths.
Yeah. I love. I've done a few projects in Berlin, and obviously visited both for work and without work, and that rebellious mindset and rebellious culture that they have in Berlin is really poignant. You can really kind of see that and feel that, and I think that creates such a freedom to create from a creative point of view. Tell me if you think I'm right here, but like if you look at photographers, stylists, or whatever it is, I feel like they just create with a lot more freedom in Berlin, which I think is quite cool. No.
I agree with you in a sense. There is no standard that we want to live up to the creative scene here. It's more of creating your own truth and identity. And I think this is a freedom that a lot of other countries maybe do not have, because they have a very strong national identity. And, with German national identity, it's a kind of a difficult subject. Even for us Germans, we know that there is a history that we are aware of, and that is always going to kind of have an impact when you talk about Germany. So we're very, very careful about setting a political statement or so on. We rather just set personal statements, and that obviously creates a certain freedom for us, because we don't aim to how would you say, to recreate, but actually to invest in our own identity. If I don't know if this
I see what you mean. Like a lot of originality kind of comes. I guess it's a lot more creating what feels right within, rather than I guess finding inspiration from elsewhere. If that makes sense.
Yeah, or just remixing things in a way that you don't need to find a political statement for it, or a certain universal meaning. The personal meaning is enough, and I think that is a really big creative field to work in, or a big creative area to access. If you're not constantly having to, or you're not constantly thinking about what would this message be, rather than what do I want this message to be, and then doing a personal approach.
Nice. I love that. All right, let's talk about sneakers.
Yes.
So you started collecting in the late 90s. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, mid 90s, late 90s.
So yeah, talk to me about, I guess, where that passion came from, and like how you've continued that from, the beginning up until now, and how that's, I guess, shaped your life.
Well, I've always been a tomboy. I was always more into climbing fences rather than going shopping. And it's today still like that. I don't shop a lot. It's more when I go shopping, then it's really just for sneakers. It's a very specific focus when it comes to shopping. And I got into sneakers. Basically, I could have gotten into anything, because when you start collecting anything, you find the world in a microcosm of this thing that you're collecting, because you can look at it from all aspects of the world, if it's from a political or socio-cultural aspect. And that really interested me when I got into sneakers a little bit more, because when I was a teenager, obviously sneakers were a status symbol. I grew up with an older sister, not much older, only a year and a half. So we were quite close as a teenager. And in that time, of course, I watched her friends and her peers, what they were wearing and what was important in those scenes. And in the hip hop scenes, sneakers were a big status symbol very early on already. I mean, in Berlin, even in the 80s, you had it as a status symbol, but I was still too young to participate in the scene there. But I would say the sneakers scene started developing in Germany at the end of the 80s. And it became much more serious after the wall came down, because, like I said, the eastern parts were having access to products, and obviously it made the whole scene much more bigger and more interesting, also because of the different approaches. And so, I got into sneakers more or less not by planning to becoming a collector, but rather than having interest in a subject and in that status symbol. And then once I bought more and more, I also wanted to know the history behind the shoes, and just found out about this whole world that is, this whole microcosm that is sneakers.
Yeah, and the sneaker industry historically has been very male dominated. And you've seen the sneaker scene kind of, I guess, evolve over time. Like, how have you seen that evolve now, I guess, from a kind of positive point of view? And do you feel like that? Do you agree that the sneaker scene has historically been more male dominated, or not necessarily?
It's interesting that you say more male dominated because, you know, obviously as a female collector, this is a question I get asked quite a lot. And I've just been working on a really long-term project where I ask myself that question: is the sneaker scene really male dominated, or are there female protagonists in this scene that live up to what I would call, say, like what I would say is a serious influence. And I do have to say, it is only male dominated because the spotlight was more on males. But I think there's, just like in hip hop, it's a very nice similarity with the development of hip hop culture, that in sneakers you see a lot of female protagonists participating in this culture, but not necessarily getting the platform or the spotlight that the male protagonists get. And so, yes, I would say from the outside, it's a very male-dominated scene. But I do see a lot of designers and collectors and, you know, all sorts of women participating in the scene as well, and really defining it, not only taking part, but really defining it.
Nice. I love that. And 100%, definitely, I guess from the outside, like looking in, for those that aren't definitely within the sneaker scene, we're seeing so many more female protagonists do such amazing work within the sneaker space. We'll get back into the conversation shortly, but before we do, I just want to take a few seconds to just give you a little bit more information about Creators House. So Creators House is a not-for-profit youth empowerment organization where we aim to empower and support young creatives. We do it through a few different ways. Firstly, we have this amazing creative studio where you can do things like photography, podcasting, graphic design, music production, and much, much more. And it's totally free for 18 to 25-year-olds. It's a top level studio. Literally all you need to do is go on our website and book your slot. But then secondly, we also know how important education is. So we want to make sure that we're educating young creatives. This podcast is part of that. But then we also run in-person workshops where we bring in industry professionals to run them. But then we also have more smaller individual-based mentoring as well. And then thirdly, which we're most proud about, is we also offer free therapy to 18 to 25-year-olds because we know how important mental health is. So if you want to know more, just check us out on our website. All the details will be below. But for now, let's get back into the conversation. I guess a little bit of advice. If someone wanted to get into sneaker culture, and the sneaker industry, not necessarily just because first of all, obviously the passion is there, but not necessarily just because they're passionate about it, but to potentially see a career within the sneaker industry, like other opportunities for people to actually earn money from it and actually build a business of some sort through the sneaker community, like starting now, for example, or do you generally see it as more of a passion thing?
Well, it is with sneakers like it is with everything. I think you can make a profession and a lifestyle or a life and a career out of just about anything nowadays. I think we live in a time where career paths are not as straight as they used to be. Like, i.e., you go to school, go to university, go into your job, and then work in that job, or maybe two different jobs over the span of your career, and then, you know, you retire. I think that is not the case anymore. And I think also this idea of the generations before us that your education is mandatory for certain careers. I mean, don't get me wrong, education is always key for everything. But I see that the normal education systems that are in place at the moment are not usually a guarantee for success or a guarantee to stay in the business that you're started with. I studied communication design with a focus on photography. And I chose that because I would have liked to maybe study free arts and stuff like that, but I wasn't very certain what I would do with that knowledge, that like what profession I would actually pursue with that study. So communication design was for me really a subject that was more helpful for many different disciplines, I would say. You know, you can do communication design in graphic design, in photography, in writing articles. You know, there's many different ways of using that. And I think nowadays this is exactly the case. You know, you don't have to You don't have to already know what you want to do, as in, I have this profession in mind. You more have to know what you like and really stick with it and really be humble about what you're interested in and trying to learn as much as you can about that. I think that is the best recipe for success, in a sense, because it may not bring you the biggest money. If you're only after money, then you should learn a profession that is specifically going in that direction, and when that is your main goal. But when your main goal is really to have a profession that either you feel that nurtures your soul or your ideals, or if you choose a profession that you have the feeling that you can grow a lot personally and also with your skills, then I think it's very important to just listen to what you're like, what you are like, and what your strengths are, and mainly what your interests are, because your strength, you can play into them, but you can learn a lot of other stuff. So the interest is really the main thing, and I've been interested in many things, so my work is also very interdisciplinary and very many things that I like to do that because I'm interested in many things.
Yeah, and then what I really like about your approach, career approach, from a photography point of view anyway, is, generally speaking, I know everyone's different, but generally speaking, when people do go to university, they tend to go to university, study, I guess, enjoy the university experience, and then finish uni, then it's like, okay, now I need to start a career kind of thing. Whereas your approach was slightly different. You started ultimately building your career from the beginning while you were at university from a photography point of view. So you kind of got into uni. Yes, you were studying it as well, but you got into uni, but you started working as a photographer from the beginning throughout your university experience. So then when you graduated, you were kind of ready to go. Like, was that intentional, or was that just simply because you enjoyed photography? Talk to me about like the thought process behind that.
I think it was partially intentional and partially just necessary because, I too had to pay my rent, obviously. And although I did get a little bit of support from my parents and from the state, if you want to live a certain life standard and consume certain things, then obviously you have to earn some money, and that's just a reality. Like, of course, we are all working to find a higher purpose, but in the end, we are also all working for money. And I think this was a motivation for me to. I think when you're in university, it's a perfect opportunity to start working because you have so many things off your back already. You don't have to worry about, in Germany anyway, you don't have to worry about your health insurance or your public transport tickets, all these tiny little things that you don't have to worry about. And also, I didn't go to university from 9 in the morning until 9 in the evening. So usually I was off in the afternoon and I had a couple of hours free time. Of course, I had to invest some of the time with homework. But in the end, when you're in university or when you're studying, you still have a lot of time on the side. And you can choose if you want to spend that time just relaxing, or if you want to pursue other interests that you have. And I think university is ideal for that, because once you're in a building with many different people that are interested in sort of the same thing that you are, so the connecting pool is really great. And then second, you have so many opportunities as a student. You have student how do you call that? You get a rebate on a lot of things as a student, and I think the world is really asking you to participate while giving you the opportunity to participate in with less costs. So I think university is the perfect time to start using your extra time for your extra interests, because once you start working, you will be very focused on getting that money together in the beginning, just to keep your head above the water. And in the end, a lot of these dreams that you can nurture in the time of university are falling away when you start working.
Yeah.
So
I think that's so valid. And I think your example is university, but I think for maybe a different example is while you're young and you're still living at home, for example.
Yes.
So let's say you're 18, 19, 20, 21 or whatever, you're still living at your parents' house. As you mentioned, you don't have, you're not paying rent, you're not paying, those extra bills that you're going to have. Like, that's the time to really focus on your craft, but then the cool thing there is you have an opportunity to focus on it through the lens of passion and not pursuing money. And I think that's a great foundation to have. So in terms of photography, what inspired you to get into it? And did you get into it before university, or was it during the university period that you got into photography?
So I got in photography when I was a teenager. Actually, I had always been really into drawing and arts, and generally I love producing things with my hands. So whether it's bookbinding or making stuff out of clay. So generally, I've always been creative in the visual arts and really interested in that. And that's why I also mentioned I would have liked to study free arts and become just an artist. But, you have your parents in the back of your head telling you have to get a good profession or a good job. And we all know the image of the broke artist. So, yeah, I think it is important to pursue what you're interested in. Like I said, your passions and yeah.
Nice. And then, so as we mentioned in the intro, since, starting your photography career and then graduating, I think you have worked with a client list that a lot of young photographers would love to be able to experience, right? And we kind of named them all in the beginning, and there's many more than that. This is a very big and open question, but how do you get to a point where you can work with this level of clients and this level of brands as a photographer?
I think in any creative job, it is really important to realize that you can be the best artist in the world. You can be the most creative genius in the world, but nobody's going to know about it if you don't show the world. And I think this is the great opportunity of our time back like 50 years ago or even 20 years ago. You really had to show some stuff on paper to prove your profession. But nowadays you have media outlets like the social media and you can do your own website like this. It's really easy to show the world who you are or who you want to present yourself as. And just being aware of the fact that if you put things out there, maybe only a few people will look at it in the beginning, but people will look at it. And if you stick with your productivity and you stay humble and work on yourself and not constantly look to your right or left what others are doing, but really trying to pursue something that feels real and honest to you, then people are going to notice. And that was what happened with me. With photography, I started being interested in it because I was drawing a lot, and I had a really good art teacher in high school. And for one project, we did a photography project, and I took some portraits. And it was the first time that I got a compliment from this teacher. He was a really grumpy and very critical guy. And it was the first time that I actually got a compliment for any of my work from him. And this stuck so much with me. This impressed me so much that I thought, okay, this is worth pursuing further. So don't underestimate the compliments that you get from wherever they come. I mean, I also gotten some compliments that were career changing for me, sometimes from children even, or from, not people that you're expecting from, but something that clicks in your head that gives you a different view of what you can do and of yourself. And so it is really important to stay open and humble and always not trying to put your work into your service, but into service of others. So, that is a way of, generally as a freelancer, you should stop feeding your own ego, because it's going to be, your creative ego is going to be there anyway. You don't need to feed it, especially, you just have to react to it. And trying to share your passion with other people is much more fruitful than trying to just show off, if you know what I mean. So I think it is, for young creatives, it is important to realize that the world is watching if you wanted to watch. So be aware of how you're showing yourself. If you're super critical of your work and you always put it down, then it's going to have this image of you as well. And if you're super egocentric about your work and you only see yourself, then also that is going to be realized. So I think just be open and be willing to share and willing to collaborate with people.
Nice. I love this concept of the work that you deliver is of service of others rather than of service of yourself. And I guess it can kind of go both ways.
May I just say one thing of where you're talking about service of others? Because I always feel like I also, as a creative, often have the feeling that I cannot live out my whole creativity in the service of a brand or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I think it's not really about that. I think it is really interesting to accept the challenge to do your best work for somebody else. And that is really a challenge that you always can set just for yourself, doing the best that you can do for this. Just not trying to please the standard of quality for the client, but your standard of quality. That is really important to develop as a young person.
But I think that's a really interesting one, and potentially a really tough balance to get, right? Because if you are a creative and working as a professional creative, whether in this case we're talking about photography, but it could be whatever else, you are producing a product for a client, right? And a client is paying you to produce a piece of work, and their vision may be totally different to you. Not totally, but maybe a little bit different to your vision. So how do you have that balance of you as a creative and as an artist create something that is real and authentic to you versus creating something that is what the client wants? What do you do? Or I guess, have you had a situation where that gap is too far wide and it's had an effect on you? Or does it always generally tend to be kind of quite close together? Like, how do you balance that?
Well, of course, the gap is a lot of times very, very, very wide. But I think that is just challenge to realize that when you get a job from a client, this client is working obviously with certain restriction of how the image of this brand is, restriction of what the people above the person who is giving you the job is telling them what is right and what is wrong and for the brand. So these restrictions are really just a kind of a framework to work inside of for you. And I think it is a really nice challenge because it's easiest and hardest to do when you can do anything. But if you have some restrictions, you actually have a framework to work onto. So I think this is a really nice challenge for creatives to not take it personally and always say, oh, my creative ego is not being fed and I cannot do what I want to. It's not about that. It's not about creating, like, if you want to be a free artist, then okay, you can do that. But then you have other problems to deal with, you know. But if you are a creative who does jobs for brands or for clients, then these restrictions are really a great framework to hold on to, and also a certain security, I think. So I don't think you should look at it as a bad thing, but as a positive challenge.
Yeah, and I like that idea of, because sometimes as an artist you get so, I guess, invested in your art, in your creativity. But this idea of not taking it personally, like it's nothing personal against you. It's not to say that maybe this idea or this idea or piece that you pitch isn't good. It's just it doesn't fit these frameworks, as you mentioned. Super, super interesting. So
yes, and you will realize if this job is going against your morals or creative ideals, then obviously you can still say no. That's the great thing about being a freelancer. You know, if you don't like something morally or from the image, then you can say no. But if you do, then I think it is really your challenge as a creative to do your best work for that.
Yeah, nice. So kind of going back to the conversation around the amount of brands that you've worked with, again, quite an open question, but like, how do you get into these brands? Like, these are, sometimes it's tough to kind of get in, it's tough to find the work from these particular brands and organizations, because sometimes when they're so big, it's like, where do I even start? Like, how did you manage to build up a portfolio of working with this many brands? Did they come to you or did you go to them?
So I think for me personally, as a photographer, I worked in two fields. One fairly, fairly conservative field, and one fairly new field. So streetwear is the newer and more youthful and more open field. And the more conservative field that I'm working in is music. So Universal Music and so on. There are more conservative clients than, in my opinion, Nike, for example. But I got into this field very differently. So I'm just taking these as an example. So the conservative photography field I got into because I did, for not necessarily as a job, but just out of my own interest, I took some pictures at certain events and I did share them on my blog, or I did share them with people around me, and they got aware and started perceiving me as an event photographer. And that is really a key point that's why I also said, realize that the world is watching, because it is really interesting how your profession can be very different to how you're being perceived. So the perception of your creative work is really crucial for what you will be booked for. And therefore, all the work that you do are part of your corporate identity, the corporate identity that is you as a creative, if you know what I mean. And the other part, the not so classic or not so conservative work that I do for photography started because I was very interested in sneakers, and these sneaker brands obviously also saw that I was a photographer, and certain events like sneaker releases and so on, I kept on taking pictures. So all the work that I did starting off to get into that field was just personal work. It was not work that I did as where I had clients or where I was actually booked for, but it was all work that I was personally interested in, and then, showed it to the world through certain media outlets. And that led to brands realizing, okay, so there's this photographer. I'm just gonna say photographer now, not female or male, but there's this photographer, this person who is, on one hand, I don't know if they thought that I was good, but good enough for booking. And on the other hand, had the advantage of knowing about sneakers and sneaker culture. So this was two wins that the client would see in me, booking me, for example, for a sneaker event, because they would know that on one hand, it would be easier for me to photograph the people because the scene there knows me already and wouldn't be so shy and so disrupted by my presence. And on the other hand, I knew the scene, so I knew what I was looking for in the pictures. If you do a sneaker release and you don't shoot a picture of somebody putting a shoe on and having a big face about it and things like that, you know what I mean? So, there's a certain components that are your qualities that people perceive, and they will book you for these qualities. That's why I say it's really important to think about what you're showing of yourself and how you're showing it, how you're presenting it. Presentation is key in this business. Yeah. You can do also the same with not showing your work. You can do your best work and present it in the wrong way, and it will just look really bad. So, yeah.
So then how important do you think it is to have a niche? Right. So in your case, it was, I guess, started off anyway through the sneaker scene, and you kind of really, brands started to find you and establish you as, I guess, the sneaker event photographer, quote unquote. How, because I know a few other creatives, and they're known for a certain thing. And that's a good thing because, you get recognized and you build your brand as that. But then I guess sometimes it gets to a point where you don't want to just be identified as that thing. Right. So how important is it to have a niche, or do you think it's better to maybe open yourself up to be a little bit more, I guess, flexible in what you offer?
I think all the perceptions about a creative are creating also a lot of boundaries and restrictions for that creative. Because, for example, I started as a portrait photographer, and I always saw myself as a portrait photographer. But because I've earned most of my money and worked in the field of event photography the most, nobody sees me as a portrait photography or fashion photographer. And therefore, I don't get booked for these jobs a lot. Of course, I do also get booked from the people who know that I have these skills, but I don't present myself majorly in that way. And so therefore, yes, there are also restrictions that come with the way people perceive you. And finding a niche is, in my opinion, crucial, because you need to get your foot in the door somewhere. You need to have a standing somewhere to spread your wings from there, in my opinion. And for me, I just I don't know if I created or I just I was just pushed into these niches. But for me, having different niches to work from made things a lot easier, because I don't want to say it in that way, but I am a minority in a sense that as a woman, if I go to an event and I'm a photographer, I'm usually the only woman as a photographer. If I go to an event for sneakers, now not anymore that much, but I also used to be only the only woman there. And I think that by itself just created a niche, so to say, around me. And but it made it also easier for me, because like these restrictions restrict that you can go out of this niche, they also support that they give you a stronger identity in that niche. So I don't think I would have been successful as a sneaker consultant if my niche as a female sneakerhead would have been so strong.
Yeah, and I think this is so relevant in, I guess, business as a whole, right? If you want to look at the biggest scale, I guess, out there, you can look at Amazon as an example. Right? Amazon started selling books. Now they, their TV platform, they have all these other devices that have nothing to do with selling books, but they started and recognized and established their foundation as one thing, and then grew from there. So I think it's
there's always room to grow.
Yeah, and I think that's the key learning here, is like, don't feel like you have to stick to one thing. And generally creatives, they love so many different things, right? But if you start off and you create that niche that gets you in, and then from there, once you build your brand as an individual, then you can grow and start doing multiple different things.
Yes, and you will be surprised what your niche, what new ways your niche brings for you. Because I never intended to work with sneakers. I never intended to have a profession in sneakers as a consultant or as a curator or whatever. I always just was really, really interested in it. And then the situation came, like throughout the pandemic, for example. I had a big change in my work through the pandemic, because as an event photographer, obviously I could not earn most of my money for a year or two. And therefore, sneakers became more important, in the sense that I just spent more time there, spent more time on Instagram connecting, spent more time with people talking about brand related stuff and things like that. And that's where the outside perception also changed, and they saw, okay, she has some knowledge in that area as well, and vice versa. Clients got aware of that and got back to me.
Nice. So then, with that said, let's talk a little bit about your consultancy work, because you've kind of been consulting pretty much from the beginning. But when did it get to a point where, or I guess, how did it get to a point where you thought, oh, hold on, this can actually be a part of my portfolio? I can really I guess own being a consultant for these brands and kind of build that confidence in it. Like, how did that kind of come about?
It's so funny, because I never saw myself as a consultant or as a curator or so on. Although like you said, I've done these things actually from the beginning. But it is the same, like I said, when your outside world perceives you as something that you don't even perceive yourself as, and you realize, oh yeah, but I am doing that. I am actually that. So you don't realize it. For me, I didn't realize it until the outside world reacted to me on that. So I did do consulting a lot of times, also just by interdisciplinary work, just helping people out. I didn't like all the consultant work that I do. Like most of the consultant work is answering a message on Instagram and just giving answers to a few questions that somebody else doesn't have access to that knowledge to. But I think becoming a consultant was really like the step of realizing myself that I'm actually already doing that work. It was not a conscious decision, and it actually only happened when a couple of years ago I tried to do a new curriculum, a new CV, a curriculum vitae, and I tried to write down all the stuff that I've been doing in the last few years and trying to figure out certain titles for these positions.
Yeah.
Or titles for these professions. And then I realized, the title of a consultant or a curator fits this things that I do the most, and then I put it in my LinkedIn account or wherever, and then you start realizing, oh, okay, so yeah, I'm really doing that as well. Yeah, so it's not always a super conscious decision, or actually a way that you choose for yourself. Sometimes the industry chooses.
What I've kind of been picking up about this conversation is it seems like all of your career has been very organic, right?
Yes.
Things have kind of been built from a love and a passion within, but then from there, work has just come organically to a point where you've pretty much been a freelancer your whole career, right? From before uni, you've never actually worked, your typical quote unquote 9 to 5. You've been a freelancer from the beginning. Was that intentional or was that organic as well? Like, did you make a conscious decision that that's what you wanted to do, or did it just happen?
I think the only conscious decision I made in that direction was not making the decision. I think a lot of decisions were made for me by not actively pursuing a certain way. And I just followed the flow in that sense, and just it is very important especially as a young creative, to have a healthy confidence and actually believing in your skills, even if and that's why I keep on repeating that humility is important, because a lot of people have a much bigger idea of what their skills are, and a lot of people much smaller. But it is really important to believe in yourself and believe in your mistakes, that it is okay and it is important to make mistakes, because they're the only way to learn, and the only way to change is through pain. Also realizing that every change comes with pain and with fear and with anxiety and money problems. And whenever I had the feeling that I don't really know where this is going, and I don't know when the next job is going to come in, I don't know how I'm going to pay next month rent, I was never scared to also do jobs that other people might have thought, oh yeah, when that's a little bit below me. So I've always done little jobs on the sides, also as a freelancer, not as an employee, but working in sneaker stores and stuff like that, just to make sure that I can pay my rent. And that gave me a certain confidence that even if I am not landing on my feet with photography or with whatever other creative things I want to do, I can still, I have 2 healthy arms and legs. I can still work in a sneaker shop or scrub toilets or whatever, So I was never scared of working in whatever profession brings me money in that moment. And I knew that things are always temporary. Even if I become a house cleaner, the next day I can say I don't want to do that anymore, and I want to do something different with my life. And I think that's what you perceive as organic, as not having to cling onto some security, because realizing that there is no security in life is really important as a freelancer. Otherwise, you will always cling to that financial security. But there is no such thing. There's no security financially with your health or whatever. And we are learning that day by day. I mean, nobody expected a war to break out in Europe, and we have it on our doorstep. So I think a lot of things are just a mental. It's just a mindset of being confident in yourself and believing that even if your work is shit and you feel like it is, really, really rubbish, stick with it, and realizing that no master was born, so everybody has to learn. And yeah, it's just a natural thing, It's a sentence that helped me a lot was better done than perfect.
Nice. Better done than perfect. I really like that. I was gonna wrap up the interview, but I want to kind of touch on that point. Better done than perfect. And I think that's actually super key, because a lot of the time, I'm one of them. I'm a perfectionist, right? And a lot of us are, as creatives, are perfectionists, because
you have to be,
and you have to be, right? And there's definitely pros in being a perfectionist. But sometimes to a point where you don't want to release something because you feel like it's not right. But what I'm hearing from you is, yes, take pride in delivering great work as a perfectionist, but sometimes it's better to be out there and not perfect than not at all, right?
Yes, just realizing that the standards you're setting for yourself, which are probably much, much higher than anybody else's standards, you have to realize at what point are they actually helping your cause, or at what point are they actually standing in the way of your cause? And I think standing in your own way is a quality most creatives have, because I too I'm anxious about letting go of work that I don't consider perfect. But in the end, there's, especially with a client there, I said it's a helpful restriction. In the end, you have to deliver something, and there is a time limit and there's a money limit for everything. So in the end, you have to realize that there has to be a conclusion about things, and the conclusion should be what is the best that you can do and what is the worst that you can give out of your hands, because a lot of times you won't have the time or the resources to finish something to your perfectional standards.
Nice.
That's just the reality.
Right, so last question I got for you, which you've pretty much answered already throughout the whole conversation today. But if you were to give one piece of advice, maybe your top piece of advice for a young creative that's just starting off their career, in your case, there could be a photographer. In your case, directly related to your trajectory, or not. But just in general, what do you feel would be, I guess, your top piece of advice for young creatives getting into their career?
Oh, there's so many things that you have in your head when you're a young person starting out. I think it's very important to differentiate between criticism and advice, because a lot of critic sounds like advice and vice versa. And a lot of criticism is advice, but sounds like criticism. So I think, having the humility to really, also towards yourself, a lot of criticism, the worst criticism always comes from myself, obviously, and look where it's helping you and where it's not, and try not to take things so personal. I think I see a lot of people around me that are so incredibly talented. They're standing in their own way with, I don't know, anxiety issues, with ego issues, with money issues, with also ideas other people have of them, So, it's really hard to find your own voice, and you're listening to your own voice also, like having your own voice being loud enough to go over all the critics and advice in the end, because in the end you have to be happy with yourself. And if somebody says you should pursue that way, and that way looks nice and looks like a good way to go, but you don't feel it, then don't do it. And I think really following your heart is the best, or following what gives you a good feeling is the best way to go. And here again, a good feeling, differentiate, is the good feeling laziness and not having to accept a challenge, or is the good feeling actually jumping in the cold water, throwing yourself out there, and the good feeling that you get once you got over that challenge. So yeah.
Nice. I love that.
Sorry, that was a little bit much.
No, that was amazing. We've had such a great conversation. I think we could go on forever. But yeah, I really appreciate your time, Julia. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me and for listening to me.
So that's it for today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Make sure you follow our socials so you don't miss any of the amazing content that we have coming up. All the details will be in the description below. And we'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.